Today's episode is brought to you by CASSA, the Canadian Association of School System Administrators. If you've been listening to Education Matters, you know that one of my central themes is exploring Canadian identity through education and connecting the dots between leadership, policy, and meaningful change. And so this is exactly what CASSA does. They bring together superintendents and system leaders from coast to coast to coast across Canada to tackle the biggest challenges in public education with a sharp focus on equity, student success, and collaboration. Learn more at CASSA, that's CASSA-acgcs.ca.
Books that Leona writes and in her speaking engagements as well, she has this beautiful way, and I think it's so important when we talk about the truths of our history to have that parallel or that braiding around joy and around love and around hope and around possibility, because we wouldn't be here today had our ancestors not also had these emotions and these visions for us today. We see the world from understanding the truth and the trauma that was in that truth, and understanding that there are other truths as well that hold up joy, laughter, humor, possibility, connection, family, culture, language, and the beauty that all of that brings forward in our writing.
In this special episode, recorded in partnership with the Canadian Association of School System Administrators, I'm joined by today's co-host and CASSA Executive Director Reg Klassen, along with two of Canada's most thoughtful educators and storytellers, Leona Prince and Monique Gray-Smith. Leona is an award-winning educator and is currently the Director of Instruction for Indigenous Education for School District 91 near Chaco Lakes. She is the author of A Dance Through the Seasons, published by Wavemaker Press, and the best-selling co-author of Be a Good Ancestor, published by Orca Book Publishers. Leona lives in Burns Lake, British Columbia. Monique is a best-selling author, speaker, and one of the country's most respected voices on reconciliation, belonging, and hope. She is well known for her storytelling, spirit of generosity, and focus on resilience. She currently lives in Victoria, British Columbia. Together, we explore the power of stories to shape identity, build community, and help young people understand both themselves and the world around them. Our conversation moves from Indigenous storytelling traditions to school leadership, mental health, outdoor learning, and the growing sense of disconnection many students and educators are experiencing today. Along the way, we discuss why relationships remain at the heart of learning, what it means to nourish the human spirit, and how leaders can help create schools where every child feels seen and valued. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy my discussion with Reg Klassen, Leona Prince, and Monique Gray-Smith. Leona, Monique, Reg, welcome to the podcast. We're really excited to have this roundtable. And as always, there will be an introduction that I've pre-recorded here that gives folks a sense of your backgrounds and your work. But maybe, Leona, we can start with you and you just give us a sense of what kind of work you're involved in now. What's keeping you busy?
Oh, the better question is what isn't keeping me busy? It's from our list. It's a shorter list for sure. I am an educator and an author, and right now I am Director of Instruction for Indigenous Education for School District 91 here in BC. And that keeps me plenty busy. We are doing really exciting things in the area of mental health, which has a lot of my attention these days, and I think it deserves a lot of attention. And so, yeah, that's the most exciting part of my work right now. I just spent the morning in a school talking about prevention and how students can just sense their world and sense themselves so they can lead healthier lifestyles. And so it's a big part of my work right now, alongside my wonderful colleagues. And then writing, again, like Monique, busy. Recently just released a book, Little Brown Girl, and it was mostly premiered on Moose High Campaign Day. And it's my appreciative approach to lifting up Indigenous girls in this country, if I were to synthesize it down.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And Monique, same question to you. Feel free to do the shorter list if the list is too long on what you're doing, but give the audience a sense of what's keeping you busy these days and the kind of work you're involved in.
Oh, thank you for that question. I'm grateful to be with you today, and I'm mostly writing these days, doing a fair bit of speaking, which has involved a lot of travel as of late. I'm just wrapping up a book tour for a book that came out at the end of January called Sharing the Light, a collection of stories and reflections. And kind of piggybacking on that, a new book that just came out at the end of April called Cookum's First Drum, a children's picture book to help children and adults understand the 60 scoop. That book is loosely based on my mom getting her first drum when she was 82 at the one-year honoring of the children who didn't come home from Tecumseh to Secwepemc. And she was given that drum in a blanket giveaway exercise and talked so much about how much that drum gave her a sense of belonging and connection, and how much joy that drum brought her as well. And so I think a lot about, when we talk about our troops, and, in the books that Leona writes and in her speaking engagements as well, she has this beautiful way, and I think it's so important when we talk about the truths of our history to have that parallel or that braiding around joy and around love and around hope and around possibility. Because we wouldn't be here today had our ancestors not also had these emotions and these visions for us today. So I think that for me, when I think about my writing and my speaking, and I think this is why Leona and I are good friends, is because we see the world from understanding the truth and the trauma that was in that truth, and understanding that there are other truths as well that hold up joy, laughter, humor, possibility, connection, family, culture, language, and the beauty that all of that brings forward in our writings.
Well, I think that's very beautiful. And I want to dive right into the kind of, if I can put it this way, the marriage of those perspectives and why they're both extraordinarily important to understand. But as we found out, or as I found out, I should say, as we were prepping for this, you two, and as you indicated there, Monique, know each other very well. Can you take us back? Where did you two meet, and when did you first come across each other?
I know. Geez. I'll take us back through memory lane. Monique and I are friends, but more than anything, she's a mentor. She's one of the best humans that I know, and I tell her this often. I have so much gratitude, for folks in this country, in this province, and specifically people I get to walk beside for just creating good work for good reasons that, help our children navigate their world. And so I first seen Monique at a Pro D event where she was speaking. It was during her earlier works, and I have carried on a teaching, and I say it everywhere, and I attribute it to Monique. It was one of the first moments in a Pro D session when we didn't have a lot of Indigenous authors and thought leaders speaking in front of our staffs and our districts. And she said that we needed to start planting seeds with our children, and that, it's our job to help them grow. And of course, I probably translated that over and over and over again, but the message is the same, that our children need to understand that they are brilliant. They need to be told that. A child should never go through life not hearing what they're good about. And it's up to the adults, and it's really reminiscent of our cultures that we would do that. So-and-so is so good at this. I can't think of the amount of people, including Monique, who spoke into my world as an author. But when I was a young person, because I lead in education, there was folks, elders, knowledge keepers, my stepfather, who spoke leadership into me. And so I think it's a time-honored tradition that, and that very first lesson, I knew that there was just this great light that Monique shares it through all of her stories. I knew she was one of those people, and I just admired her ever since. And then our paths kept crossing.
Yes.
Monique, do you have an
And
early reflection of Leona?
I think my earliest, as a writer, I'm going to come from this lens, from a writer, is you sending me, before it was Be a Good Ancestor, remind me, I'm just drawing from catching it,
A Dance Through the Seasons.
A Dance Through the Seasons, which I loved, and I bought a whole bunch. And at the time, this is also what I love about Leona, is that she didn't go to a publisher. She published it herself and then distributed it herself. So I bought a whole bunch of those books and I was giving them away. And then you showed me Be a Good Ancestor. We were somewhere and I was like, I'd love to support you to get that book published.
Yeah.
And Be a Good Ancestor has been, I give that book away almost everywhere I go, to schools, to districts, and to little people in my life, because no matter where they come from or who their family is, it speaks to all of us that we can be a good ancestor in how we love each other, how we love the land, how we love our more than human relatives. That we're laying down medicine for those generations who will come when we are an ancestor. And I think that your writing, but also your leadership in the bricks and mortars of education, has been really profound and really instrumental in changing the wavelength around how do we lead with our heart, not just our mind. And I think that that's a piece when we talk about bringing together the Canadian school administrators. This is an important piece, and it doesn't surprise me that your work right now is focusing on mental health, right? That we have to think about the whole learner. You know, I often say, we're educating their heart, their mind, and their spirit. And so you're leading in that way in these bricks and mortars, and how you're not only working with the little ones or the young people, but also with the educators. So I'm really looking forward to our time together in Saskatoon, because I think that, your role in opening our time together and being witness to our time together, it's like laying down good medicine for people to pick up. And I think then when people pick up those teachings and that good medicine, when they go back to their district in late August, early September, that their heart is changed in some ways. And when our heart changes, then how we lead and how we hold each other up changes. And then when that changes, it ripples through the district, it ripples through the school, it ripples to the families, and it most definitely ripples to the learners. So I'm really honored to be sharing our time together with you, Leona, in Saskatoon.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the invite as well to just be a part of, speaking to leaders about what you talk about. And to further answer your question, Jason, Monique is a matriarch in her heart. And so she's always so appreciative of other people. And I think, it's not a surprise that her and I are presenting together. I think, we cherish the time that we get to spend together, but we also, like you indicated, have that shared message. Monique tells stories that matter, like that touch people deeply. And I think from her first book, Tilly, she came in at a time when a lot of us didn't see ourselves in the literature. And that book had such a special place in my heart. And I was like thinking about some of the little intricacies, and she mentions them in her talks. Like, she talks about the party line. And I remember having a party line in Fort St. James way back in the 1980s. And then what she told me to do is to advocate in a really beautiful, appreciative, gentle, loving way through my words, and how to use the power of words, as she has time and again with her books. There's many a time, like I just picked up your most recent book, Cookum's Drum, and I know what that meant for you. And I have a collection. I'm trying to get a book shelf for all my beautiful children's books from, incredible folks. And, what I think about it is that what Monique and I try to do is show that we are more complex than people let on. We're trying to let people into our cultures. We come from different cultures. There's similarities, but there's also a beautiful diversity about it. And when she talks about we tell the whole picture of who we are, because often we're seen for our resilience and our trauma and our struggle and our history. And that's definitely a big layer, but it's not everything. And so what you'll find is the truth piece that Monique talked about, circle of love. Like I said, it's just like there's all these layers that people tend to, think of Indigenous people as this monolith, and it's just like and everyone's the same. Everyone's had the same experiences. And what I hope for our people and all people through both of our books is that they see the layers of brilliance and the contributions that we have to society and how, we need to learn from each other. It's an important lesson. And every book that I pick up of Monique's, it's another lesson. And one of my favorite children's books I have a thing, I love illustrators. So one of my favorites is I Hope, but the message in there. And anytime I'm feeling like I'm losing that, I pick up that book. I don't think I've ever told Monique that. I read that and, I just continue to hope.
That's beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Leona. It's so interesting. I just had an email from a school teacher saying that in their last staff meeting, the librarian said that any Indigenous books that were either written by a non-Indigenous person but illustrated by an Indigenous person, or written by an Indigenous person but illustrated by a non-Indigenous person, they've been told to take off the shelves.
What?
And I was like, what? Which takes me to I Hope, right? And the reason for that book that I wanted a non-Indigenous illustrator, who is Gabrielle Grimard, was to show that we can collaborate, and to show that in the hope is us coming together. That to me is reconciliation. Is how do we bring together our gifts to create something that allows children to see possibility in collaboration? So I haven't yet figured out exactly what step to take about that, but it really disturbed me.
Yeah, because some of us are very specific in who we select. Monique has always told me to be very careful in my selection of the people who are going to bring my stories to life. And so I know you do that with deep care and respect.
Yeah, I mean, maybe try telling that person to actually read the books and see what they're about before you get them off the shelves, right?
Well, it sounds like it's become a policy.
Yeah, and this can be, obviously the kind of tyranny of policy, right? If you don't get it right and people aren't just thinking about nuance and, it's evident to me in that case that the real message and the ideas haven't stuck with that person or those group of people making those decisions. But can I ask you both to kind of double click on the fact that you're both authors and intentionally wanted to become writers? I'm a student of literature, and I think a lot of people fantasize about writing books, and I don't think probably why they never write a book is because it's so difficult to do. So can I ask, and I'll start maybe with you this time, Monique, why did you start writing? What gave you the inspiration and the bravery to start writing?
I applied to the School of Social Work in 1992, I think. I'm trained as a psychiatric nurse. I was working in acute psych. And in that interview, as I was leaving, one of those women said to me, "I look forward to reading your book one day." I didn't think she was talking to me, right? At that point, I was 6 months sober, and I didn't graduate from high school. I had to go back to get my grade 12. My alcohol and drug use and Algebra 11, my nemesis, right? There was a reason I didn't graduate. But I went back and got my grade 12 and went to nursing school. But I had self-limiting beliefs, so I just left that room. And she said it again as I was leaving. "I look forward to reading your book one day." That was the first pebble. But it took me 20 years to have the courage to write. Because I kept asking myself, who am I to write a book? And then one day I started to ask, what would I write about? And I think that the questions we ask ourselves are so important, because our brains will search for the answers. The same with the learners, right? The questions you ask them, their brains will search for the answers. So what kind of questions do we want to ask ourselves? So for me, The book that Leona mentioned, Tilly, only came out 14 years ago. I was 44 years old. And, I think about the landscape since then, right? Like the amount of books that are out now for our children and their families and educators to see and experience us is really beautiful and profound. And such a breadth of ways of worldviews, lived experiences, and stories. And I'm always grateful. I kind of think of it this way that, there were aunties for me. When you go berry picking and the person or the people in front of you, usually the aunties, they hold the bush back. So when you walk through, you don't get smacked in the face by the bush. I feel like that's what's happened for Indigenous storytellers, is there have been some really extraordinary people who have held the branches back. One of them was Sheila Rogers, who hosted The Next Chapter on CBC. Almost every single episode, she had an Indigenous author on way before it was popular too. And I know she really fought for that to happen. She was one of the people. And so for me, when I walked into that, that through that branch area and into where all the berries were or the stories, something opened up for me. And I'm always grateful to those people. And I feel like then it's part of my responsibility to hold the branch back for the future storytellers, but also for educators to come forth and read our stories, understand our stories, and really think about, how do I use these in a classroom? How do I use these stories to change hearts and minds and spirits? Yes, of my learners, but I think what's also happening is the learners are going home and educating many of their family members, parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, because this is, in many ways, the first generation that's having our books in the classroom in a way that isn't just, on June 21st, or isn't just one day of a year, but they're there all the time now. And for me, that's really beautiful.
Leona?
I am just really loving that analogy of a berry patch. She knows I'm an avid berry picker, and just that holding the branches back. And that's what Monique did for me. I sent, my first book saying, hey, someone I respected, have a look at this. And that's really, you said intentional. I don't think Monique or I were intentional. Neither of us are English majors. I was actually a fisheries biologist before I was an educator. So I think, and most people assume that I have an English degree, and I do not. I'm just sort of, it's not that we didn't have the education. It wasn't the same education as everyone else. And so, I love stories. I escaped in my childhood through story. I was transported, and I found that the power of words was so great that no matter who you were and no matter how limited you were in your travel, you could go anywhere. And so, I was also told stories, and I say this often because there was two main storytellers in my life, and it speaks to my, my background. The first storyteller, was my great auntie Catherine, late great auntie Catherine, my grandfather's sister. And I didn't know it at the time, but it was, again, one of those things, as Monique said, something that was like well before its time. I had a carrier language, which now we would say DACF, but carrier language and culture teacher, and it was my great aunt. And from K to 4 in the school district that I now teach in, that school has long closed. It was Sauche Elementary. My mom chose for me not to go to the day school because of her experiences there. So I went to the public school, which was really interesting. But my auntie was there, so I felt really comfortable. And she told me all of our traditional stories. And so I fell in love with stories. And I have a favorite story, and it's How the Trees Got Their Marking. It's like the Lord of the Rings, where the trees can walk. And so when I saw that movie, I keep saying this because when I first saw that movie, I'm like, oh my goodness, my Auntie Catherine would be freaking out right now. And because I hadn't read any of the stories, I just watched it on film. And then my grandpa John, my father's father is Irish. And so my dad's half Irish. And so that part of my lineage was really interesting. And I think we all have such rich stories. And this is where Monique's teachings of appreciation of other cultures, we need to honor identities, we need to layer them, we need to understand them, we need to understand each other's stories, because I just feel completely blessed. I didn't know it was a blessing at the time, that, I'd limited access to that part of my identity. And yet I can still hear my grandfather's words and his teachings. We would play chess. We'd watch Jeopardy. He did crosswords. And then he also told me, and both of them spoke about stories like they were history. These weren't legends or myths. Both of them fully believed the traditional creation stories and trickster stories and little people stories of our people, and they both had them. And so I thought it was really interesting, the connections between the cultures. I didn't think of myself as a storyteller. It takes courage when there's not a lot of people in front of you, but folks, Monique is my Sheila Rogers. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I was actually, one of my co-teachers, colleagues, in my school said she had a dream about me. And I asked her if she could gift me that dream. And she said, it's about you. It's yours. Very Indigenous thing to say. Can I have that dream? I'm thinking of this story. I created the characters, did my first manuscript. But like Monique, there was one teacher in that building, and her name was Sonia Rock, and she was the kindergarten teacher. Those people are magical. Kindergarten teachers have magic. You have to be magical. But she said, you're going to do important things. I know you're going to do important things. And so again, it's those pebbles and speaking people's future into existence. And so I think that's where I got my start, and I wrote it down. I put it away, and the illustrator, who has now illustrated tons of books, when I was very first time I was a vice principal, she was one of the parents in the school, and I saw all this art around the school, and I was like, who is this artist? It's fabulous. And that's, the illustrator of my first two books, A Dance Through the Seasons and Be a Good Ancestor, and that's Carla Joseph. And I said, more than anything, I thought, yeah, she would do a good job in illustrating. And I said, Carla, everyone in the world needs to see your artwork. That's how much I think. And she's just this really quiet, respectful, unassuming, beautiful artist, but beautiful soul. And, I did get my wish, and so that made my heart just fill with so much joy. And, Monique, in, coming back full circle, when she helped me and introduced me to her publisher for Be a Good Ancestor, and it was in Victoria. We were having lunch, and it was the conference to start the 10 years of Indigenous language revitalization, the decade of Indigenous languages. I was there for that, and I visited your town, your area of the world. And I once said to Monique, I was like, and you'll remember this one, because I said, how do I ever repay you for this? And she is such, and the reason I call her a matriarch is because when anyone succeeds, she succeeds. And so there's no, competition or anything. That's not even a part of the fabric of who she is. And so I said, how do I repay you? She says, pay it forward. And so I want to share this with Monique. So yesterday, Monique, I was at a school, and there's this young man, and we we're asking them about their future goals. And he's Indigenous. And he said, he want to move on his own and get a cat and have a job. And I said, well, what's something you're really good at? And your words came back to me around planting seeds, right? I like to write stories. They're just little stories. Oh, Monique. I was like, they're not little stories. They're not little stories. I said, can you share your stories with me? And then one of my books happened to be, Remember Who You Are, happened to be on the shelf. And I went over and I picked it up. I said, guess who wrote this? Because we're from the same nation. And you should have seen his light change. His light change, Monique. I'm glad we get to share this today. It was such a beautiful moment. And I thought about you, and I said, pay it forward. And that's been the resounding message. And it really tells you a lot about our culture and our people when we remember who we are.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah.
That was a lot.
Well,
I made a note when you were talking. You twigged for me something I'm working on a novel and a type of story that I've never written before, and you said something, so I wrote it down, because if I don't write it down, I'm not going to remember. So thank you for that little nugget for my story.
Well, Leona, being Indigenous and Irish, I mean, the two great storytelling traditions, like you didn't have a choice but to become a writer. That's wonderful. Well, thank you both for sharing what got you into writing. Maybe one quick question, and then I want to transition to Reg and talk about a little bit about school leadership, but maybe this question can get us there and connect it to storytelling. Can you try to articulate to the leaders listening the importance of storytelling and messaging, maybe in a more practical sense? I don't know if we want to go that way, but from the leadership perspective, why it's important for leaders of school districts, of schools, to be able to convey a meaningful story, not only about their community, but about the purpose of school and the reason their students are there.
I think stories change hearts and minds, and they change our emotions. And when we change our emotions, we change our trajectory. And I think that stories help us to understand ourselves. They help us to understand each other. They help us understand history and the future. They help us to understand like the fabric of goodwill in the world. They help us to find a way through the darkness, I think. And I think the more that administrators can use stories with the learners and with their staff teams, the easier it will be to either implement change or welcome new people to the team, or say to people who might be on their next chapter, like, we wish you the best, to navigate really difficult times as administrators. You know, here in our province this year, there have been administrators who have had very, very difficult times. And that difficult time has had a ripple effect. And it's the stories that can help us navigate through that darkness. And that we don't always have to rush through the darkness. In the darkness, we transform and we find a new way forward. So sometimes those stories of transformation in darkness can be real medicine for people when they're in times that aren't of immense light. I just think that, you know, when we think about stories, that they're part of the really critical fabric of education. Yes, in the role of administrators, but no matter what the role is, stories, I think stories in education, as you used that word earlier, Jason, can be married. They can be braided, they can be woven together, they can be, sure, they can stand alone, but together, they're way more powerful.
Speaking of taking notes, that was brilliant. In the darkness, we transform, Monique. That's a beautiful, beautiful notion, and I know resonant throughout so much of world literature. Is beautiful, beautiful concept. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I think, you know, as someone who works within this system, and it's a quote that from someone that many people, including Monique and myself, really admire for his work in literature, Richard Wagamese. All we are is story. Every single person is a collection of stories. You're a walking story. When I think of educators and I speak to them, I said, you tell stories all day long. There's not one part of your day you tell stories of science, stories of math. We seem to think of story, you know, in English language arts, but it exists everywhere. And then when you know, roll that up, because every leader is an educator and was a teacher, your story changes. And the power of your words and the responsibility to those words and how you're telling stories becomes very important. And so, you know, I always think of, it's strange because this goes through my mind every time I talk about, you know, leadership and responsibility, and it's Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. But it actually echoes what our elders say, that leadership and title, it's not another level of power, and you can't just see it at that. There's aspects of it that you have to exercise power, but more than anything, it's responsibility. And so as the leaders of the system, we're responsible for the narrative or the story of our district. And we actually have a lot of power in changing that narrative. We can stick with the status quo, and that's comfortable. But, you know, as we heard from Monique, because I too was like, closed my eyes when you said that, Monique, It's when we're put into areas of discomfort that we grow in really good ways. But, a lot of, leaders who are the best storytellers of leadership, are visionaries. They allow, stories to flourish, to leave them unbounded. And I see systems where, in our district, when I was first hired, and this is why I'm still here, is one of the questions was, and it really told me the story of this district, is like, what is your blue sky thinking for Indigenous education? And I've talked about blue sky thinking all the time. Like, if there were no limits, what would you do? And that really told the story of this district. It told me the story of the leadership. And so through everyday conversations, you're writing this narrative. And if you don't pay attention to the story, that can be, a trap. But if you're always keeping your ear to the ground and witnessing and cultivating the story of your system, you'll be in a really great place altogether, because looking at the entire picture, the entire story means that you're caring for all. You're, wrapping your leadership around your system. And so it really is up to you to witness that story, cultivate that story, nourish that story, and share the collective responsibility of everyone in your system carrying that story for the benefit of our children and for the future.
Yeah, I been listening to this great conversation, so thank you for that. Talking about stories, I appreciate the commentary on giving legs to the stories that we want to share, the great stories in our school divisions. As I worked as a senior leader with aspiring principals and young principals, I remember saying to them all the time, remember that everybody who comes into your office already carries with them what they think is the answer to the problem that they're going to put in front of you. So just be quiet and listen. And your job isn't to give them answers. Your job is, in fact, to ask intelligent questions so that they can share more of what they're thinking and maybe give direction through those asking of questions. And I think when we talk about creating the story fabric of our school divisions, we want to include all of the people around us in their stories. And with our questions, we give guidance to that fabric so that that fabric is a strong fabric and is gorgeous and continues to grow, as opposed to one that's tattered and torn and we're trying to hang on to it and keep it together. So listen, young leaders or people who are in leadership and are young to that leadership, feel so much pressure about having answers. And, I was in a meeting yesterday and somebody said, do you have something to say? And I said, no. I learned long ago that when you're surrounded by really intelligent people and they're speaking with enthusiasm and we're headed in the right direction, I just got to listen and maybe ask some good questions. We're on the right track. And so that powerfulness about stories, and everybody carries a story. And as soon as we listen to that story, we have a better understanding of the circumstance with which they're currently in. And that helps us work with learners in our classroom. That helps us work with the teachers that we have to work with. And so I just really appreciate your commentary on telling stories. And I love the analogy of that was the first pebble. And I think it's our job as educators to make sure that all of the kids that leave our system have a whole lot of pebbles so that they've got something to look at and say, hey, yeah, maybe I should try that. So Um, when we began this conversation, we talked about wellness, and I really believe that stories are part of wellness. But one of the questions I wanted to ask you, given your experience in your time in schools, what are some of the most significant challenges that we have in our school system today that keeps us from achieving wellness in that school system? And I'm talking about not just students, but generally, as I get a sense, or as we all get a sense, as more and more gets added onto the school system and teachers feel less able to do what they came into this profession desiring to do, what are some of the significant challenges that keep us from achieving that wellness? So whoever wants to go first.
I can take this one on because I'm living and breathing it right now, as we all are. I think education is a sort of a micro, sort of like a small version of the world. And so what's going on in education is it kind of tells you what's going on in the world abroad. That being said, that's, we have an incredible capacity then to affect change in the world. What I keep hearing, and I always listen to the adults, but a lot to the kids, is them feeling that they're disconnected. Disconnect is the biggest thing I keep hearing from our kids. And although that may seem like a small thing, I think it is probably the root cause of a lot of what our children are experiencing. If we're going to get into specifics, it's anxiety. The Anxious Generation is a book, right? Children are not getting outdoors, they're not getting outdoors. I was at a conference and the children on the panel, and I found this to be really funny. Not the concept, but one of the young girls, and it made me think of the terminology and sort of what is the story right now of education, is she said, we are craving organic relationships. And for her to have to quantify that tells you a lot about our system and our world as a whole. And, I leaned over, it's regular Pro D, to one of my colleagues, and I said, she's here because of an organic relationship. And we had we had a little laugh, and I said, it is so interesting that they have to quantify it in that way. Something we take for granted, something that we were able to cultivate so easily because we had so much more connection playing out.
Leona, you and I grew up in the 80s. That's why there was nothing but organic connection.
Yeah, it's true. And it blew my mind, but it really is the root cause is this idea, disconnect from identity, disconnect from other humans, from self, and then being overwhelmed by the amount of information coming in from the outside world. If you think, I think about my teaching, again, I wasn't as connected as maybe our educators are to the digital world. You are only able to process so much information in a given day. And so everyone has information overload right now. We weren't supposed to know the business of the world. We have been taken out of our communities digitally, taken out of ourselves digitally. And so now what is required is for us to be grounded in space, in relationship, and get back to our basic human needs. And it's as simple as going outside together. There's a huge movement in land-based education, and I think that's the way forward because of it. And it all connects. Teachers are overwhelmed, and there's this narrative that some of it's perceived and some of it's real. If you think about it, if you're in a system where everyone's telling you you're overwhelmed, you're going to feel overwhelmed. So how do we shift the narrative happening in our system? And how do we encourage kids to get back to just being kids and not paying attention to the problems of the world. That's too much information. They should know about self, their values, what they're good at, their pebbles in their pocket, what they say about their future. They don't need to know what's going on every minute of the day in the world. That's overwhelming. And that's what the system is overwhelmed. We as humans are overwhelmed. Oh, it's that's it.
I would echo that, because I was going to respond saying, I think that the greatest challenge is either the beliefs or the policies that hinder educators getting outside with the learners. Because when we're outside, for us as adults and the learners, and we smell that first inch and a half of the earth's floor, even if she's covered with snow or ice, that cortisol in our brain goes down. And when our brain is flooded with cortisol, our ability to learn, to remember, to be a civil citizen is compromised. So no matter how beautiful the lesson plan is, if all 22 or 23 or 28 of the learners are flooded with cortisol, that lesson plan is going to go awry. So when we go outside, that cortisol goes down, and what comes up is dopamine and oxytocin. Those are the chemicals that allow us to feel good, to feel connection, and to feel belonging. And as Leona said, that's what we're craving also. So the more we can shift those policies, the more we can shift the beliefs to hold up the importance of being outside, we are going to see a significant change. And my dream really is that, I'll say in 5 years, but it'll probably be longer, that educators will be asking and administrators will be asking of their educators, instead of asking, when do we go outside, they'll be asking, when do we have to be inside? So it will take a significant change in how lesson plans are designed, but also how leadership leads. And once that happens, we're going to see a difference in mental health. We're going to see a difference in connection, in belonging, in grades, in graduation rates. We'll see a difference all across the board. But one of the biggest differences will be the fulfillment of the educators and the administrators.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. There is a movement to do more outside. Of my 5 grandchildren, my grade 1 granddaughter is in forest school. Every second Monday, she spends the entire day outside. It doesn't matter if it's minus 25 or if it's plus 25. She spends the day outside. And it's quite interesting listening to her have a conversation about her day of learning outside. And she is fearless about going outside. It doesn't matter what the weather is. That's beside the point. She's outside. And so she's the one of the grandchildren that wants to muck around in the soil and plant gardens. So we're watching this develop, and it's quite interesting. I find it interesting that we talk about the relationships and sharing stories. I've never yet asked a student what do they remember most about school. Very seldom do they remember. I remember being taught pre-calculus. And if they do, it's always about the relationship with the teacher. Yes. Always about the relationship with the teacher. And that means space was given for that relationship to develop. And that relationship doesn't happen because you both like numbers. That might be where it starts, but then something else happens between two human beings. And I think that for me, in our fast-paced world, as we feel like we have to get all these things done, I think the notion that we are supposed to get through grade 12 by a certain time in our lives is just nonsense. If that's what we expect, then kids should be able to take till 25 and kids should be able to do it by 13, whatever. Like, I like the notion that everybody has a gymnasium where they can go in and pull the outcome off the wall. I'm done. Pull the last one off, have a celebration, and say, okay, I'm on to something else. I just think that we need to give kids time and space to do that learning. But I guess, so here we are in this fast-paced world, and teachers are struggling. And I have argued with deans of education and said to them here in Manitoba some years ago when I was working as a chief superintendent, I really don't need you to have them for 5 years. Okay, you can probably teach them the really important stuff in 2 and send them to me. Whatever else they need, I'll pay for and we'll teach them. We'll get that to them. Besides, I'm spending a lot of money teaching them how to teach reading because we're anyways, another soapbox I need to get off of that. So, okay. So I want to ask if you were to have, kind of a wish list or the freedom to give some direction to, teacher programs. What areas would you think would be the most important that teacher training programs should attend to in preparing teachers for our kids today?
I think for me, it goes back to the previous question. That is preparing them to educate outside on the land and with stories.
Okay.
And also preparing them to advocate for that, because probably leadership will have been trained in a different way. So there will be potentially some conflict there. So being able to advocate, knowing the research, the evidence that says this is how valuable it is. And also, how do they nourish their spirits, which is different than self-care. Like, how do they really nourish themselves so that when they come into the classroom, they can be a light?
Can you just before we turn to Leona, can you expand a little bit on that? Nourish their spirit. Like, when you say that, what do you see?
Well, we talk about self-care, and it's important. For me, it's like I go for a walk in my neighborhood. It's good for me. I feel better after that self-care. But when I go to the forest, or I go to the ocean, or I work in my garden, or I play with my cat, or we have family dinner, or I read something inspirational, that's nourishing my spirit. Meaning like that my cells are actually functioning in a different way. And when my cells are functioning in a different way, my vision expands for possibility. And when my vision expands for possibility, I don't get regimented in what it has to be. It's like, oh, there's other possibilities for how this might unfold. Oh, there's other possibilities for how I might see and experience this learner or this fellow staff member. So I'll talk about this in our visit when we're in Saskatoon, about the importance of nourishing our spirits.
Okay. Oh, I quite like that. And our vision expands. I remember a teacher long ago, because it was long ago when I started, who always reminded us at the staff meeting of the students' redeeming qualities.
Mm-hmm.
And he got heckled a little bit for that but he never lost it. He never lost it. He always reminded us of that kid's redeeming qualities, regardless of what they might have done. So I appreciated that. Leona?
Before I answer you, something that, sort of threads, both of what you, Reg, and Monique shared is something I heard just on Friday. We had a speaker at a conference, and his daughter is one of my colleagues, Roberta Edzerza, and his name's Charlie Carlick. And he said something that it's one of those, Monique, I'll remember it forever moments. And he said to this about children, he was talking about Indigenous children specifically, but this can be extrapolated to the entire system. You need to see value in them to get value out. And that's reminiscent of what you just shared, Reg.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's it. See that they have value. They're redeeming qualities. They're light. We have to see it and to get it out of them. If we have our mind made up about certain kids, that we never get to tap into their brilliance, who they are, get them to connect to their identity. So I really am appreciative of Elder Charlie Carlick for saying that. It was just one of those, mic drop moments. To answer your question, I actually have an example because I have been thinking a lot about teacher education programs, and I see a shift, but I was really impressed with this, and I'll give you an actual example. In BC, we're talking about compassionate systems. And it further aligns with when you talked, Monique, about nurturing your spirit. This is what this is all about. And, you know, I unfortunately first learned about compassionate systems online, so I didn't get it. You know, again, the digital space, we have research coming out that it's actually not that beneficial, and we need human connection when we're learning. And so I was a little bit skeptical. It's been a big movement in BC. This is not, you know, secretive. I'm always curious, but I'm also cautious when it comes to things that impact our children and the children I'm responsible for, the Indigenous children in our system, and our adults. And so I was curious about it, stayed open-minded, and then I went to this session with Leighton Schnellert and Terry Taylor out of UBCO, and they talked about their teacher education program. It is grounded in land-based knowledges. It is grounded in, and this is their rural and remote education degree. It's grounded in land-based knowledges, grounded in compassionate systems and being compassionate. And the thing that impressed me as well is that the first thing that they have to do and carry through their program is really get in touch with their pedagogical core to understand who they are as educators. I myself didn't go through that process, and it's always the children and the elders that convince me something is moving forward. Well, there was a principal in the audience, and she put up her hand and she said, I have a teacher out of your program, and she's teaching the children how to be compassionate with themselves and each other. And using the language, you should see the change in that classroom. There was the evidence I needed that this was good for children. As a people who are child-centered, it's incredibly important to always center our children in all of our leadership decisions. And so cut to, I agree to go to a compassionate systems retreat. Eureka, my colleague Carrie has convinced me finally. And so I go up to Nishka, and I have never been there. Shocking. It's, you know, not too far down the highway here in central BC, one of the most beautiful places in the world. And my second set of evidence that, you know, nurturing your spirit, you know, just tapping into who you are. I had never given myself, and there was a bunch of leaders there, and it speaks to what we were talking about, a bunch of people who found it difficult to give themselves space and time to be compassionate to themselves and to meditate and to practice and to be on the land and learn from the local, you know, territories, the local nation, the Nishka people. And there was these little sisters, and they are Gigi's grandmas in the territory, and they took on compassionate systems. And they were talking about the transformation of really nurturing your spirit, because that's exactly what it is, Monique. That's exactly what it is. And I actually took time off from the busyness of my life to nurture myself, to show myself compassion. And that's a really weird switch because, you know, educators are generally not, oh, this is all about me. It's a weird switch. But if you are not well, you can't take care of anyone else. And so I spent 5 days up there, and I'd never been able to meditate in my life. I have a busy mind. And so I found myself deep into a meditation for the first time in my life. And I'm like, what is going on here? But it was actually the elders that convinced me. They told me through story how important it was, what they learned, how they used the tools. And it was a really transformative, and I don't use that word lightly or, you know, regularly, experience. And knowing that this teacher education program is grounded in those ideas of really connecting to yourself and really caring for yourself in deep and meaningful ways, and using the land, which we said is beneficial. It was just naturally a good thing to do. So and then I started asking other folks that I know in post-sec, why aren't we doing this everywhere? If we have this shining example, why are we not doing this everywhere? Because, you know, I'm also provocative.
No, say it isn't so, Leona.
Well, thank you both for sharing that. I feel like we could easily go on another few hours, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. But before we we wrap up, I do want to ask a question that I think, Leona, you'll like, because I tend to end every podcast with this blue sky question, which is, if you had a magic wand or almighty powers, or you were the queen of education for a day, what would you change? What would you do? And I do have to remind people that you are all powerful in this question. Can I start with you, Monique?
It would be that we would be asking, when do we have to go inside instead of when do we get to go outside?
Don't even have school buildings. Just make it outside.
Well, I mean, there's lots of places like Scotland has K-12 that has buildings, but not real buildings.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazing. My son would love to go to your school. Guaranteed. Leona?
My magic wand. I think this would be beneficial for all of us in our pursuit, our collective pursuit of reconciliation, whatever that means, from wherever you are. I would love to shift the long-standing narratives that have been held in education, free ourselves from them, and create new ones that are more reflective of the reality we are existing in right now.
Beautiful.
Beautiful indeed. Well, thank you all for your time. This is an amazing conversation. And, I get this privilege to get to meet folks ahead of meeting them in person. So I hope a lot of folks that have tuned in here will seek you out, as I will be at CASSA in Saskatoon. And geez, we're just almost a month away now. So it's just around the corner.
It's coming up.
Yeah. So anything, Reg, that you'd like the audience to know about CASSA in Saskatoon?
Well, we have Leona and Monique, who are going to be a part of our conference. So that's really exciting. As you can see, that they've thought deeply about education and have great things to share. Their light is the knowledge that they bring to human relationships and moving forward in a better way with our children. And I'm excited to hear all of the things that they have to say at the conference. One of the frustrations that I have is that people from around the country don't see the prairie cities as a place to go. And, I didn't grow up that far away. I didn't grow up. I didn't, it wasn't that far from Saskatoon that I grew up. Let's say it like that. So Saskatoon was my city as a kid. When we went to the city, it was Saskatoon. And it's a phenomenal city. It's often referred to as a city of bridges because it's got lots of bridges over the river, and the river is beautiful, and it's got a beautiful river walk. And it's got some really great spaces to see. But the other thing I wanted to mention that was pertinent to me as a kid growing up is that hardly an hour away from Saskatoon, going north, is Batoche. And it's where Louis Riel made his stand. And you have to go see that because the church that was standing there still has bullet holes from that battle, and you can still see where the Métis dug themselves trenches on the hillside as the RCMP or whoever was coming to fight them. And it's a great story about people fighting for their rights and independence. And when we look back now, we see all of the atrocities that were done. And so I think that's one small thing. The other thing is you got to take the tour on the Thursday morning because we go to another great site, which is just south of Saskatoon. And so there are so many things to do in that city. In addition to a fairly significant conference where there will be deep learning and deep conversations from educators across the country as we all face these different realities, but We all will face them at one time or another. And so we need to continue to share. So I just want to leave it at that. Thanks, Jason. Thanks,
Reg.
Leona,
Well,
and thanks, Monique, for sharing. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
thank you.
Super
And
excited to be joining you in Saskatoon. I love Saskatoon.
yeah, I was going to say, Monique, if you know, you know, Saskatoon in the
Yeah.
summer is a magical place.
I
And if
have
you,
never been.
well, you're in for a treat, Leona,
Yes, you
as
are.
well
Yeah.
as those that haven't been. Once they see it, will understand the beauty of the place for sure.
Well, can't
So-
wait for my side quest to Batoche.
Give yourself
Wonderful.
some
Well,
time.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for this wonderful conversation. We look forward to seeing you in Saskatoon. This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Buccheri. Until next time.